Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers, and fun, interesting shows in the offseason. This one is our top 10 offensive players of the Pete Carroll era. We're going to count them down. We're going to start at the top from number 1 down to 10. We might have a few extras to talk about. We'll see if we agree. We each brought our own lists. Welcome in, Keith Myers.
Yeah, I think this will be a fun show. I mean, right from the top, I think we're not going to be that different on the first 2 or 3, but where the debate will happen is later, and that's why we're going in this direction, because it makes it more fun to see who made the list and who didn't.
All right. So how are things going? I know for me, the weather's pretty good this time of the year here. It's not too hot, but it's getting a little hotter, and it's going to be sticky. Monsoon season has officially started, and it hasn't rained yet, but I can feel the moisture kind of accumulating in the air. So it's kind of muggy. And when it's 108 and muggy, it's awful.
Yeah, it's kind of miserable. No, up here it's nice. Great Pacific Northwest weather. Only problem is that I have been, stuck inside recovering from COVID. So I'm mostly recovered, and that's why we're back recording. So let's go ahead and jump right in.
All right. Well, I'll let you start. Who's your number 1 offensive football player in the Pete Carroll era?
Do you really have to ask? I mean, there's only one candidate.
I know. I don't have to ask, but
it's gotta be Russell Wilson.
Yes.
I know that he's not exactly the most popular guy in town at the moment, because we're starting more and more leaks coming out that he wasn't the greatest guy in terms of how he forced himself out, and that he got Schottenheimer fired and then left anyway, and all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you look at his on the field production, and he's the best quarterback in franchise history. He's a top 5 quarterback in the league. He's one of the great playmakers just we've ever seen, and I just don't know what else to say. Like, we can throw stats up there, but they're just meaningless, because he blows everyone else away.
Yeah, I mean, he's leading the franchise in all the major passing categories and rushing categories. As far as career rusher, he's up there with the career rushing on the career rushing list.
Isn't he 6th all time?
It's kind of crazy. I would say that he's not only of the Pete Carroll era, but he's the best offensive player this franchise has ever had. And you're going to have these little Walter Jones,
Steve Largent,
and Walter Jones,
Steve Largent. I mean, that got guys that are in the Hall
You're
of
right.
Fame.
You're right. Well, I think Russ is going to end up getting there, and I think he's going to end up getting there in a Seahawks uniform. My thing is that I think if he would have been here one more contract, he would have just been the unquestionable leader of all time. So, but as far as this little back and forth stuff is concerned, and the news that he kind of forced Brian Schottenheimer out and blah, 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 that just came out in the last day or so, that'll all be forgotten in the long term look at Russell Wilson's history with the team and so forth. So I don't really put too much stock into that, and I just focus on what he did as a player and what he did for the franchise, and represented the franchise very well while he was here, and took us to a Super Bowl, took us to 2 Super Bowls, won 1. He's off the top of my list too, and it's not even a hard one at the top there. So for number 2, this is and these are all subjective, but this is my number 2 overall, and it's got to be Marshawn Lynch.
Also my number 2. I mean, he was the identity of the offense. Like, I know Russ was he was the star and he did everything, but it was Lynch that was the identity. He was the guy who ran people over. He set the tone. When he would get going, suddenly you could see everyone jacked up on the sidelines. The defense would start, flying around a little faster and everything. And they were just excited to watch Lynch run. And that's even before you get into the Beast Quake and what might be the greatest individual play of franchise history. So I think I agree. He's got to be number 2.
Yeah. And as far as the identity thing, you're spot on. He kind of came in and changed not only the identity, but the trajectory of the franchise when he came, and then that run, and then to get that win in the playoffs there, where we went in as the first or second team or something overall at 7
first team
wins.
ever to be the first team to have 7 wins, to be under 500 and make the playoffs, and then to beat the reigning Super Bowl champions, the defending team that, like, what were they, 20 or was it 14.5-point underdogs? Like, it was just absolutely like they were expected to get blown out, and Lynch just could not be stopped in that game. It was phenomenal.
All right, so what's your number 3?
Number 3. This is, I think we're going to start getting some debate going. I've got Doug Baldwin as my number 3.
I've got Doug Baldwin as my number 4.
Oh, interesting.
So very close. But go ahead.
I would say I've got Baldwin in here. He was, he was the receiving side of the passing offense. There wasn't a lot of help for him for a lot of the time that he was there. It was Baldwin and a bunch of replacement level guys, and he was always open. He's just uncoverable at times, and really made this offense click and work in ways that you just don't see a little slot receiver do. But he just made everything work for the team. And that's why he's my number 3. He's just always open, always clutch, and fantastic hands. Just got everything.
Hey, I'm going to ask you if you can try something. Your video is breaking up now and again, and I'm wondering if maybe you've got a couple of windows that you can close to kind of correct that speed a little bit. So my thing with Doug Baldwin is that I completely agree with everything you said. Guy came in undrafted out of Stanford and just really worked his butt off. I mean, he was probably the hardest working guy on offense that I've seen in a long time on this roster, and just worked at his craft over and over every day during practice, and he worked on routes, and he was a great route runner. He had some of the greatest feet in franchise history, probably second only to Steve Largent, and just really was amazing and outperformed all expectations. And I would have loved to have seen him play another 3 or 4 years. I think, talent-wise, he was on top of his game when he left, because of injuries and so forth. And I think he just felt like he couldn't perform at the same level that he wanted to in his mind. And so he thought he would go out while he could remain healthy after football.
Yeah, he was to that point where he had knee pain, ankle pain. He had shoulder surgery. I mean, he was just getting really banged up, and he was reaching that point in his career where, I mean, you see a lot of former players that they walk with a consistent limp, and they have a hard time moving around, and they just do a lot of damage to their bodies. And I think he just was getting to the point where he had made that choice. I want to be able to have a life after football. And so he dropped out, and it's unfortunate. But even the time he was here, it was special. He really was a great player,
and a serious contributor to the Super Bowl season. My number 3 overall is Tyler Lockett. I think that Tyler Lockett, I think last year, showing those 3 years of over 1,000 yards receptions and 80 plus receptions, 1,000 yards. I thought showed the consistency that set him apart from almost all other wide receivers in franchise history, save Steve Largent. And that's why I think he just nudged Doug Baldwin in my estimation as of last year. And I think he can only go forward, from here. So that's why he got the nod for me. But same sort of receiver, came out unheralded, if you will, out of Kansas State, and was thought more of a kick returner when he first landed with the club. I can't remember the draft round that he was in. I think it was a third round wide receiver, but he was primarily brought in for his shiftiness, his speed, special teams acumen, and thought that maybe he could develop into a wide receiver, number 3 wide receiver, for example. Same thing kind of with the Eskridge sort of pick. That sort of was the idea with Tyler Lockett, and then he came in and was way better than anybody expected him to be. And then he fought through some injuries early in his career, and then came back and established himself after they took kind of his kicking return duties away. He made the Pro Bowl the first year there, and they took those duties away, and I think he was able to then focus primarily just on receiving, and he's just become an outstanding receiver, underappreciated around the league, I believe.
Oh yeah, you look at his stats, and he's a top 15 receiver in the NFL statistically over the last 3 years. In any of those 3 years, he's a top 15 guy, but he's viewed nationally as Seattle's number 2, maybe like the top 40 as far as receivers go. Like, people don't realize how good Lockett is. And he's my number 4.
I agree. Yeah. So
Yeah.
my number 5 is Dwayne Brown, offensive tackle, left tackle Dwayne Brown. Played what, 5 years here, Keith, overall?
Yeah.
About that, and was the blindside protector of the greatest quarterback in franchise history, and stood out really pretty well. The first couple of years he was here, he was always ranked in the top 5, 6 offensive tackles in the league. Kind of fell off a little bit in the last 2 years, where injuries started to creep in for him, and they protected him as far as being able to practice and so forth, and just kind of lost that edge, I think, in terms of speed and foot quickness that he needed on the edge there. But I thought he should be mentioned, in this range on my list.
Interestingly, he is also my number 5.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that was a great pick. I was looking at offensive linemen, just trying to figure out, do we have any that belong on this list? And I came up with 2.
I did too. And I know the other one you're going to say too, but it's later on.
It is. So number 6, I went ahead and put DK Metcalf.
And I also have DK Metcalf at number 6.
God, this is getting really boring. You're supposed
this
to
is crazy. We literally did these lists. I have no idea what you have. You have no idea what I have, and we're just literally talking about them as we come up on the names here. So yeah, DK.
I was kind of expecting you to have Metcalf higher. In my head,
not quite yet.
In my head, I was thinking, maybe he probably belongs a little lower because we've seen him for 3 years, and it's been 3 fantastic years, but it's only 3 years, right?
Right. That's right. That's exactly right, Keith.
So, obviously, he can continue to progress his way up this list by continuing to be great here over the next 5-6 years. But right now, I mean, he's still that high despite being 24 years old.
Well, let's keep in mind, as a reminder, this is under the Pete Carroll era. So this is just from 2010 to this point. So 12 years, 11 years of performance is all we're looking at. So, DK Metcalf deserves to be on this list. I think he deserves to be halfway, in this range, just from the sheer fact of what he's been able to do. Exceeded expectations of his draft spot. Came in and turned out to be a better wide receiver overall, NFL ready right out of the gate, that he was given credit for in the draft, and has turned into a really dynamic receiver. The reason that he's not higher for me is just a couple of little issues for me as far as his attitude He seems to allow defensive backs to kind of get under his skin and take him out of games once in a while. And because of that, either because of that or that he's just not quite ready for the full repertoire in the NFL. He's not quite as dominant as I'd like to see him be, or I think that he has the potential to be as a wide receiver. And so I'm looking for that little next step here. I think that he's got it in him. We've talked about it for a couple of years now. Even after his Pro Bowl year, his big, statistical year, we said that he had a little bit left and he could kind of step forward. I thought he had a little step back last year. Some of that was due to the quarterback play. But we'll see this year how he fits in and integrates into this offense with a diminished quarterback situation.
Yeah, he can be a better player and have less stats because of the quarterback play. And that's the situation that he's going to be in for the next couple of years until this team figures out what they're going to do under center. So, all right, who do you have after Metcalf? Who's your number 7?
I have a guy that we haven't talked about for a long time, but I really appreciated him when he was here, and that's Zach Miller, the tight end.
Wow.
Zach Miller.
I actually think that is a fantastic choice. Guy that everyone was like, oh, he's not that good. Look at his stats. No, the guy was a right tackle. Right. He was one of the best pass blocking tight ends you'll ever see. The Seahawks would line him up and have him take on some of the NFL's top speed rushers one-on-one, and he'd win. He was just a phenomenal player, and would occasionally, get out and catch some passes and do some tight end things.
Yeah. And before he came to Seattle, when he was with the Oakland Raiders, he was a featured receiving tight end for them and made the Pro Bowl as a receiving the ball and not thought of as being more of a blocker. And he came here and he was like, well, this is what you're going to do. And he did it.
Well, when he was with Oakland, he had this receiving yards, but everyone knew he was a blocker. He just wasn't pigeonholed and, oh, you're only a blocker.
Sure.
Everyone knew how good he was. That's why the Seahawks paid him what they did to bring him in, was because they knew if they were going to form this offense that they wanted, where they were going to grind the ball in an old school way, that having that road grader, that sixth offensive lineman on the field that could also get out there and catch passes was going to be a key feature in it. To the point where when Miller finally, had that injury and was forced in retirement, the team went to a sixth offensive lineman. They had guys like
that's
George
exactly
Fant,
right.
Because
that's exactly right.
There were no tight ends that could do what he did, so they had to go with a guy like George Fant as a quote unquote tight end. Right. In order to try and mimic what he was able to do.
So did he make your list?
He actually was one of my honorable mentions. Right at the very
Interesting.
end.
So that's kind of where we diverged then.
I really wanted to put him on there, but I couldn't take any of the other guys that I had here off.
All right. Who was your number 7?
My number 7 was Golden Tate.
Interesting. And he is one of my alternates.
Weird. So yeah, Golden Tate put up some nice stats and did some great things. He was never the route runner. He didn't win early in routes, but he always worked. He kept moving, stayed open, was really, really good at working with Wilson and the scramble drill. And once they got the ball into his hands, he was always a threat to make a bunch of people miss.
He was like Samuels. Yeah. As far as that being that type of a guy that could make stuff happen as a kind of a running back body in a wide receiver position.
Well, he was a running back in college.
Yeah. So and at Notre Dame. And yeah, I mean, I was excited with the pick. The only reason that I didn't elevate him to this area of the list was that I thought that he spent the first 2 seasons in the NFL as a wide receiver trying to figure it out. He played a lot of special teams. He was a kick returner, a dynamic kick returner. And then the last 2 seasons, including those Super Bowl seasons, he really started to develop and become a factor. But I thought it just didn't quite rise up. But he's on my overall list.
Yeah, I mean he was a guy. You're right. The first couple of years, he went into his 3rd year, and it was like this guy needed to show up, or he was going to bust out of the league. And he showed up, and it was good, and it was great that he did that finally. But he gave us a couple of really good years. And
I agree.
Unfortunately, his exit, came at a bad time because he left, and then the guy that they replaced him with also left, and there's a guy that replaced him is not someone who we'll see on either of our lists, I'm sure. But I left the team without a viable second option besides Baldwin out there, and they really needed him in that second Super Bowl season.
Okay, so who's your number 8?
Russell Okung.
Interesting.
The first draft pick that Pete Carroll and John Snyder made. 2010 draft, first round. They went and got Russell Okung. He was the anchor of a really good offensive line the last time they had a good offensive line. They've been mediocre to terrible since Okung left. And even with Brown in there, they were never a good offensive line again. Okung was the last, when he was there was the last time they were good on the line. And just really solid, played well. I really thought it was a mistake that they let him walk.
I did too. That was when he was starting to represent himself as an agent player. Mm-hmm. And I think stuff just kind of went sideways there. I think the team wasn't quite ready for that and didn't know if they wanted to meet his demands as being one of the top tackles paid in the NFL. And
I think also the way the negotiations work, like there's a reason why everyone has agents, and it's not just the part of, knowing what people are worth and they're specialists or whatever, but there's a part of these negotiations where, an agent saying, hey, my client's worth this. And the team is going, no, they're really not. They're worth this much. And here's why. And when you do that and you're talking to a player face to face, it becomes very personal.
Yes.
They needed a different way to go about that. And I think they figured that out since then because they've worked with other players that have represented themselves. But with Okung, he was kind of the first that the team dealt with that was like that. And
right.
It's unfortunate because him leaving was when that offensive line really started to tank. And it just crushed Seattle's ability to turn, those couple of Super Bowl years into a real dynasty.
So I had Russell Okung as my first alternate off the top 10. So he was my number 11 pick. My number 8 was Chris Carson, running back Chris Carson. Felt like Chris needed to be on that list. I know he struggled through some injuries, especially the last 2 years and the first years, his rookie year with the broken leg and all that kind of stuff. But when he was available, when he was playing, he was a difference maker. He was the type of runner Seattle had always wanted to have. Absence of Marshawn Lynch, he came in and he did that. He kind of filled that void that had been sitting there for a while. Thomas Rawls was part of that. Christian Michael. And then Chris Carson landed and it kind of gave us that feeling again. And stat-wise, I think that he's been a really good player. This is the part of the list for me where it kind of falls off a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like there's a little bit of a shelf, but he's on there.
He's on. He made my list as my number 10 because he's never really had. And the reason why he's not higher is he never had that big season where he led the offense the way Lynch did. He's never had a season like that. He's been the leading rusher, but because of injuries and stuff, there was always that like 3 or 4 game stretch that he didn't play or wasn't available.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Then there were some fumble problems in there too, and it's frustrating. And I, listening to Pete Carroll talk, I think we know that Chris Carson's done with this whole neck surgery that he had to have and all of that. And it's too bad because he's never really had that season where he put it together, and that it's still in there if he could stay healthy. But I think health is going to finally be what pushes Carson into retirement, and that's too bad.
So my number 9 is probably controversial because I think this player was misused a little bit. And when you look at him statistically, I think that he comes out ahead, far more ahead than people give him credit for, and that's Jimmy Graham, tight end.
Yeah, you and I are in agreement on this one. Well, my number 9 is also Jimmy Graham, and I think that he got kind of a bad rap in Seattle based on the fans, in part because the trade of Unger, was part of the trade to get Jimmy Graham,
right?
And they didn't. I mean, you look at it. Oh, they never really replaced Unger for a long time, and they shouldn't have traded him and all of that. But this is a team that they've said that they were probably moving on from Unger anyway because he had such a hard time staying healthy, and they weren't going to pay him what it was necessary to keep him as one of the top centers if he was only going to play 10 or 12 games a year. And so I don't. So there's things with Graham that I think that he gets a bad rap for. He also, didn't put up the same kind of stats that he did in New Orleans. Well, they run a different offense, and he had a different quarterback. And Wilson wasn't great at throwing. He's never been great at throwing over the middle, and that's where Graham was. And you're right about him being misused. They put him in line as a blocker way too much. He's not that. He was a receiver. But he went out, and then he had that devastating knee injury.
Yeah.
And never missed. Yeah. And came back, was ready for week 1 the next year. And even though he couldn't practice because that's how bad his knee was, he still played in every game that year.
And he had statistically his best season as a Seahawk after that devastating injury.
Yeah. So there was, he did a lot. I think it's more of an expectation. The expectation was he was going to be this much more impactful player than he was.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was going to have 30, 35 more receptions per year. He was going to be, touch 1,100, 1,200 yards, receiving yards, and 10 touchdowns or more. And he was just not that. He was 75% of that, and so that's why I think he gets the rub. But nonetheless, statistically, the 3 years that he did perform were some of the 3 best tight end seasons the franchise has ever had.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's that.
You go back and you look at, who's the best tight end in franchise history, and you'll realize, wow, it's kind of a dumpster fire of a position. Empty. It is not a position that the Seahawks have ever been strong in. Your choice of Zach Miller there, I mean, this is a guy that he didn't put up receiving stats at all.
No.
And he's probably the best that this team has had. And that's saying a lot. It really is saying a lot. So,
all right, let's wind this thing up with the 10th selection. Keith, who do you got?
My 10th selection was Carson.
Okay.
Graham was 9, Carson was 10. So who are your honorable mentions?
Well, my 10, I'll list my 10
I thought
first.
we did that.
So you just mentioned him as part of this Jimmy Graham trade. Max Unger was my number 10 overall offensive player, and while he was here, I think it was like 4 or 5 years. He was terrific. He played. He was durable. He made the Pro Bowl. He was the best center, I think, potentially, given long term, that the franchise could have ever had. And then they made the trade to New Orleans for Jimmy Graham. And
I'll push back on the durable part. Go back.
Well, he was durable. Go look at him. Go look. Yeah, he played. Started all 16 games. He missed that one season where he started one game and missed the rest of the season. But then he played 15 games, 16 games, 13 games. Had got injured in Seattle his last season, and played 6 games. But then he played 16 out of 16, 15 out of 15, 16 out of 16, 16 out of 16 for New Orleans. So I thought he was pretty durable.
He was durable in the long term when you start looking at and you use the New Orleans stuff, but he had in his 5 years or 6 years in Seattle, he had a year where he played 1 game, a year where he had played 5, and then the year before that, the year before the 5, he played 13 and he missed like 3 fairly key games, and was also kind of banged up and not as effective in other games in that. And I think that the Seahawks were looking at a guy that, he had gone from playing 15 to 13 and not as good because he was banged up to playing 5.
And that's why they shipped him out.
Yeah. And they were like, he's going to cost a lot to keep, and we don't trust that he's going to stay healthy.
That is exactly right, Keith.
So I don't fault the decision. I wish they could have kept him. I wish the finances would have worked out for him to stay, because you're right. He probably would have been thought of as the best center in franchise history had he stayed.
Right. So you want my list of
your alternates.
Alternates.
Your honorable mentions.
Yeah. So I mentioned this before. Russell Okung was my number 11. Mm-hmm. Jermaine Kearse was number 12. I know, but go look at the receptions, man.
Yeah, but God, he was not a good player.
Fair enough. I mean, he had some drops. His reception percentage versus targets was
really low.
But he had those. He was the kind of receiver where the targets were down the field and jump balls and all that kind of stuff. He didn't have the speed to separate. So Sidney Rice is on there, and Golden Tate rounds it out. So I had three wide receivers and an offensive lineman.
So Sidney Rice was the first one that I left off. Zach Miller was on there. Max Unger was on there. Justin Britt, of all people.
He's not on my list at all, but I
deserves
a
mention.
Him.
He was awful as a tackle. He was kind of awful as a guard, but once he moved to center, he actually provided some stability that this offense needed, and did pretty well. And honestly, the offensive line has been such a mess the last few years that, literally he has a shot at the top 15 because it would been that bad.
Too, and then a testament to him, he's still in the league, and he's going to start at center for the Houston Texans this year.
Yes, he is.
So good for him.
When he left Seattle, it was in part because of injury. It took him a whole year of being out of the league to get healthy. And then he spent the last, year and a half trying to get an opportunity, and he did. And now he's going to be a starting center again. So that's a hard road to get back, but he did. He made it back. So good for him. Yeah. Great for him.
So what do you think? That's the list.
I was shocked at how similar the top of our lists were.
Really shocked.
Yeah, I'm not considering the first. Now, the first
I would be
4,
more shocked. I would be more shocked if we had a longer period of time to consider. But being that it was condensed into just the Pete Carroll era, I felt like you had diminishing returns after a certain point with this list, and it just really was hard to even find names, at least on the offensive side of the ball. I think when we do the defense
is going to be a lot more fun because there's a lot more people. Yeah. The Russ, Lynch, Baldwin, Locke, even Brown. I kind of knew that those were all going to be there. I thought maybe Brown might be a little lower on yours, but you surprised me there. And Metcalf. Okay. I thought there would be a little disagreement there. I actually didn't know if you'd have Jimmy Graham on your list, and you didn't have Golden Tate. So there was some disagreement, but it was just so lockstep. That's the part I think that was surprising, was just that we had not just the right guys, but the right rankings together.
Are there any Hall of Fame players on this list?
Russ.
Yeah. Do you think Marshawn Lynch will ever get into the Hall of Fame?
No. I don't, and it's not that he's not worthy, because he's absolutely worthy. He won't get in because of who votes him in.
But that could change in a long time.
No. He won't get in because the people who vote in are sports writers. And sports writers hate him. Like, genuinely. Not the local guys, because the local guys get him and they understand him. But the national guys cannot stop. He's been out of the league for how many years? And anytime his name is brought up by one of the national sports writers, whatever, there's just this level of vitriol at him because of the way that he wouldn't answer questions and he wouldn't speak to media people and all of that. Like, they genuinely don't like him. and they're the ones they're the gatekeepers. So I don't think he gets in entirely for the wrong reasons. Football wise, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. The other ones, Lockett's Baldwin's going to miss out. He was never,
too many
too many receivers. Metcalf has potential if he continues to play, but we've only seen him for 3 years. How about if he does it for 10 and then we'll talk? No one else. Well, Jimmy Graham probably will, but he won't get in because of his time for Seattle. He'll get in because of his time with, New Orleans, and then because he's also stuck around the league for a few more years and been able to compile some more stats. But no one else.
Interesting. All right,
says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know. But at the same time, during Pete Carroll's era, I mean, if you take a look at the offense and the way that they're ranked in points, total yards, efficiency, et cetera, a whole bunch of categories, they're in the top 10 consistently year in, year out. And they do it with marginal talent. Yeah, that's what that tells me.
Well, what they do with
great quarterback.
They do with Russell Wilson. They've always got a receiver or two that make it work, and for the most part, they've had. It's been a little bit of a, carousel as far as who's playing, but they've always had a running game, and so they have the pieces. And then there's been. The depth hasn't been there. The offensive line hasn't been there. There's been a lot of, like you mentioned, Curse as an honorable mention for this. He's a guy that doesn't belong in a discussion from almost any team. But yeah, there he is. So so it shows a lot about just how valuable Russell Wilson has been in this tenure, and how bad this could get now that he's gone.
I'm optimistic. I'm staying optimistic. So I'm going to avoid that comment. All right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at MyersNFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. Find the show on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. And make sure you hit the subscribe button. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.